Let's look at the overall structure of the respiratory system. Air enters through the mouth or nose and it can move to the back of the oral cavity to the pharynx. From here it can go in one of two directions. It can move down the esophagus into the digestive tract, or it could pass through the airway. And the entrance to the airway is protected by a structure called the epiglottis, which folds down airway when you swallow. If you notice in the picture in the top left here, when the person swallows a bolus of food indicated by this red blob, it pushes the epiglottis down and it covers the entrance to the airway, so the food is directed down into the digestive tract. When you're not swallowing, the epiglottis stays in an upward position, which allows free flow of air into the airway. If you're laughing or talking while you're trying to breathe and eat at the same time, then you sometimes can disrupt the operation of your epiglottis and you might end up in a choking situation. So, assuming the air has safely made it past the epiglottis, it moves down into the larynx, followed by the trachea, which then branches into two bronchi, which branch further into the bronchioles, which subdivide more into the respiratory bronchioles, which further subdivide into the alveolar ducts and the alveoli. Most of the gas exchange occurs across the alveoli, which are these sacs at the bottom here. But there is some gas exchange across the respiratory bronchioles and the alveolar ducts. But again, most of it occurs across the alveoli. If you notice this bluish stuff that is on the trachea and the bronchi, this is cartilage, and this cartilage is really important because it prevents the airway from collapsing, so it stays open no matter how much pressure is put on it. Another important layer of the respiratory tract, which is primarily on the bronchioles, is airway circular smooth muscle. I'm going to just put airway smooth muscle. And this is important in determining resistance to airflow. When we have high resistance to airflow, we have bronchoconstriction. And this would be when we have contracted airway circular smooth muscle, and when we have low resistance to flow and can move lots of air, we have relaxed airway circular smooth muscle and we have bronchodilation. And the state of contraction of this airway circular smooth muscle is the most important factor in determining resistance to air movement. Very similar to what we talked about with the circulatory system, where we have vasoconstriction and vasodilation. One other layer of this respiratory tract that I want to talk about is the epithelial layer, which is the innermost layer, and it consists of two populations of cells, in particular the goblet cells that produce mucus and some ciliated cells which actually can wave in unison just like they're doing the wave. And the mucus that's produced by the goblet cells traps any inhaled particles or pathogens that happen to enter the airway, and the ciliated cells move in a coordinated wave-like fashion to sweep all of this material upwards to the pharynx, where it then gets swallowed into the stomach, where pathogens are hopefully destroyed in that low pH in the because of the hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And this is called the ciliary escalator. So this sweeping upwards of mucus and trapped materials by these ciliated epithelial cells. And one thing to note, if you're a smoker, smoking paralyzes your ciliary escalator and makes it harder to sweep this stuff out, so you're more prone to respiratory infections and have to cough a lot to get that junk out of your lungs. If you stop smoking, then your cilia start working again. Okay, let's talk about a little more detail about the structure of these alveoli. So the alveoli, if you'll notice, are in very close proximity to the blood supply. So here we've got a bronchiole that's branching into alveoli, and here we've got a pulmonary arteriole which is branching into all of these pulmonary capillaries here. And you can see that the pulmonary capillaries are wrapped around the alveoli, and the membranes are actually fused together. So here we've got a membrane of an alveolar cell, and here we have a membrane of an endothelial cell lining a capillary. Before we talk about this gas exchange, let's just look at the cellular structure of the alveoli for a second. The alveoli are made up of two different kinds of cells. The most abundant ones are the type 1 cells, which are shown by these purple ones. And these type 1 cells are very large, and they're very thin, and they are the main site of gas exchange. There are a few of this other type of cell right here that are called type 2 cells, and these cells are far less abundant, but they secrete surfactant. And surfactant is very, very important for reducing the surface tension of the alveoli and makes it easier to expand the lungs and breathe. So decrease surface tension. So one more note about the function of the alveoli. So we said that these type 1 cells are very, very important for gas exchange. And gas exchange occurs between the alveolar space and the blood, and it goes in both directions, and it depends on the concentration gradients of the gases, because the gases move by simple diffusion. So normally, if we're looking at oxygen, we have far more oxygen in the alveolar space than we do in the blood. We just have a little bit there, at least at the lungs. So oxygen is going to follow its concentration gradient and move into the blood. Normally, though, for CO2, because that's another important exchange, there's usually way more CO2 in the blood than there is in the alveolar space, and CO2 will leave the blood, again, following its concentration gradient, and these gases are moving by simple diffusion. Just going to abbreviate diffusion there. Okay, so we will talk next time about ventilating the lungs, how we bring that fresh oxygen-rich air into the lungs, and then how we get rid of that oxygen-poor, CO2-enriched air out of the lungs.